Hi everybody, I am Graham Osborne, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to use FMOD to create an adaptive soundtrack for your game that will enable the player to move through stealth, 2 layers of tension and into combat and back again with seamless and highly effective music for your game. So let's start a brand new project in FMOD. So click on New Project and you're faced with the blank screen. There's nothing in this FMOD project at all. So the very first thing we're going to do is bring the assets into the game. So click on Assets and then navigate to wherever you're storing your audio tracks. And I'm going to bring in, just by clicking and dragging, first of all the stealth mix, then tension level 1, tension level 2, and the combat mix. You could highlight them all and drag them all in one go, but I just wanted to show you which files we're using. I also want to bring in the stingers because these help to transition seamlessly into and out of the combat loop. So let's just highlight all of those and bring those in. Awesome. So we've got our assets in FMOD. I am going to put them all into a folder because that just helps keep things nice and organized. And let's just drag all of these, so highlight them and then drag them into loop 1. Awesome. Right, we've got the assets into FMOD. What we then need to do is create an event. So click on the Events tab and then just right click a new event, and I'm going to call this Music. Now if we were going to link FMOD to a game engine, the game engine would load the sounds from different banks, so always assign your events to a bank. So I'm going to right click, assign to bank, and we'll just use the master bank in this one. We're going to keep it simple. Brilliant, so it's no longer showing as unassigned. So we're going to create a timeline. So right click in this area, we're going to add a timeline sheet, and within the timeline sheet we're going to add 4 audio tracks. So just click down here and right click again, add audio track, and just keep right clicking, add another, and right click a final time. And we've got 4 audio tracks. Let's name them. Double click, and the first one is going to be stealth mode. The second one will be tension 1. The third will be tension 2. And the final one, just double clicking, is going to be combat. Brilliant. So I have my audio tracks set up. What I'm now going to do is bring the assets onto the right tracks. So the stealth loop goes on the stealth track, and just click and drag it to the left. I want tension 1. Just clicking, holding and dragging on tension 1, tension 2 on the right track, and then the combat mix will also go onto the combat track. So we've got the 4 main loops in the game. So what I'm going to do is zoom out slightly. So using the the view menu option, just zoom out, or you can press the left bracket key on your keyboard. I'm going to move the combat track across slightly for reasons that will become apparent very soon. Brilliant. Right, what I'm now going to do is just add a few components to this. I know that these music tracks are at 120 beats per minute, so I'm going to add a tempo marker and just move it to the left. And this just helps you line up your tracks to the beats. So I've got my timeline set to beats rather than time. So time is minutes and seconds, beats is bars and beats. So it starts on bar 1 and finishes on bar 65. And that's about as much musical knowledge as you need. What I'm then going to do is just make sure these loops will loop. And there's a number of ways you can do this. The easiest way is just to right click and create a new loop region. And this blue bar appears at the top. And what that means is this will continue to play seamlessly. It will just go literally round in circles. What I'm also going to do is add a seamless loop to the combat mix. So right click and then a new loop region, and you can use this scroll bar at the bottom, just click and drag, and you can see the combat region also has a loop bar above it, and I'll just put those on the same level in the logic tracks. So the final thing I'm going to do is just put some markers on this track so FMOD knows what each piece of music is designed to do. So I will add a destination marker here. Marker A appears, and I'm going to double click and I'm going to call that stealth, and I'm going to just click and drag it back to bar 1, the very start of the music. And if I scroll across again, I'm going to click here, add a new destination marker, drag it to the right place. I will double click and I will call this combat. And the reason that we need those will become apparent as we start to build the adaptive music engine in here. Right, so what we need to do is be able to bring in these various audio loops one at a time. At the moment, if I was to press play, they would all play simultaneously, and we don't want that. We want to be able to go from stealth to mild tension to increased tension to combat without it sounding messy. And to achieve that, we need to add a couple of parameters. So I'm going to click on the plus sign here. I'm going to add a parameter sheet, and I'm going to click on new parameter, and I'm going to call this game state, or just state. And this will be from a range of 0 to 2. 0 is stealth, 1 is tension 1, 2 is tension 2. And I'm going to add another parameter sheet, and I'm going to call this one combat. And combat, you're either 0, not in combat, or 1, you are in combat. And these parameters would be controlled by the game engine. So in Unity, for example, you would go through what's called a collider, and it would trigger these signals to be sent to FMOD, and FMOD adapts the music to what's happening in the game. So let's start to build some of this automation. So I'm going to right click on each of these volume controls. So right click and add automation, and you will see the automation lines starting to appear. And I'll just repeat that for tension 1 and for tension 2. And I'm going to again go to view, and I'm just going to zoom out a little bit more just so you can see those tracks a little bit more clearly. Okay. When stealth is at 0, we don't want tension 1 and tension 2 to play. So if you look in the state parameter, this is state 0, and you can see all of the volumes are up. So what I'm going to do is just click on the audio volume for tension 1 and drag it down. And do the same for tension 2, just click on the volume and drag it down. So that means when the game state is at 0, tension 1 and tension 2 won't play. You won't hear them. So if I now return to the timeline, press play, all you're going to hear is the stealth loop, which is exactly what we want. To introduce the different layers of tension, what we're going to say is, when the game state is equal to 1, we want tension 1 to ramp up. So I'm going to create a node on this volume track just by clicking on it, and I'm just going to drag this up to, let's say, -5 dB. And what that means is, when state is 1, you will hear tension 1 at -5 dB. So let's try that. Let's just press play. All you can hear at the moment is the timeline. When I press state 1, press enter, you can hear tension 1 start to play. But that was a really abrupt introduction to tension. We want it to fade in nicely. So what I'm going to do is just click on the state parameter, and down the bottom you've got something called seek speed. Now at the moment it's set to instant, but we don't want that. We want it to be a little bit more gradual than that. So I'm going to change the seek speed to half a second. And what will happen now is when I press play and change the game state to 1, it's a much more natural introduction of tension layer 1, which is great. What we then need to do is the same for tension layer 2, and tension layer 2 will build on tension 1. So when the game state is at 2, we want to be able to hear tension 2 as well. So now what we're saying is when the game state is at 2, you're going to hear the stealth track plus tension 1 plus tension 2. So these layers are building on each other to increase the tension. So let's try that. Let's go back to the beginning. This is just stealth because game state is at 0. I'm going to change the game state to 1. And that plays tension layer 1. And when I change it to 2, you'll hear tension layer 2 come in. And it also works in reverse, so let's go back to tension 1 and then back to stealth. And you can also change the shape of these curves as well, which is really useful. You can add more sort of gradual curves, faster or slower curves. Brilliant. Right, so we've got the main foundation of the track now working, which is stealth, tension 1 and tension 2. But what we need to be able to do is jump across to combat as quickly as we can. So we're not going to blend combat in with these stealth and tension tracks. We're going to jump across to it and play it as a different part of the timeline. So I'm going to add a transition region that will take us to the marker called combat. And let's just move these down, create a bit of space for this. And this combat transition needs to last for the duration of the loop. And then down the bottom, you've got the conditions that need to be met in order for FMOD to make the changes. So I'm going to add a condition using the parameter called combat. And I'm going to say that you will jump to combat when this combat parameter is equal to 1. Job done. What I'll then do is in the combat area, I will right click again. I'm going to add a transition region back to stealth, because once you're in combat you need a way of going back to the stealth timeline as well. So again, just line it up, make it last the same duration as the loop. And the condition this time, so just down here clicking on add the condition, the parameter condition will be when combat is equal to 0, it's going to jump back to stealth. So let's try that. Let's bring the timeline all the way back to the beginning. You're going to hear some fairly abrupt changes here, and I'll show you how to finesse those and make them sound better in just a minute's time. So let's press play. Let's ramp up all the tension, because you'd probably go from high tension into combat. And then as soon as I change this combat parameter, it's going to jump over here. And then when I change the combat parameter back to 0, it goes back to stealth. But as predicted, those jumps are really abrupt. They're not very natural, and it's very jarring for the player, and it's likely to take them out of that sense of immersion they've got as they're playing the game. So what we're going to do is have a more seamless but immediate transition. And you can use what's called transition regions in FMOD to achieve that. So in the combat transition loop, if you double click on this, it opens up a whole new region here, and this is called a transition region. And what you can do is add fades or even add new pieces of audio into these transition regions. Now, I just want to find out how long this is. So that's 17 bars long. That's way too long. So I'm going to zoom in to this transition region. So I'm just pressing the right bracket key on my keyboard. I'm going to move across to this transition region, and I'm just going to keep dragging it to the left until I've got a transition region that is literally 1 bar, maybe 2 bars long. Excellent. So before I add anything to this, let me show you what that does. So when we're just playing stealth, if I jump into combat mode, it will play this gap before it does anything else, which you're going to think that's weird because there's nothing in the gap yet. There will be. This is what we're going to do. We are going to take the transition or the combat start sting, and we're going to put it in this gap. That's the first thing we're going to do, is just start to fill the gap. Let me zoom in, just pressing the right bracket again, because it's important that you get the timings of these right. So that fade is going to come in quite quickly. So we're going to bring it to the start of that transition region. And I can make this even shorter if I wanted to. And then what we can do is drag this handle here across to the left. And that now means that this start sting will play, and then the combat loop will play as soon as that sting is finished. So the sting on its own sounds like this. So let's have a look at how that sounds from the overall timeline. So if I now change the combat to 1, you're going to hear the sting and then straight into the combat music. Sounds great. What you might also want to do is just fade out. So I'm dragging, again using these handles, just dragging across any tracks that might be playing. And then if you just hover over the top right hand corner, you'll get the fade arrow, and then literally just click and drag to the left and you can fade out those source tracks. So as the stinger is playing, the source tracks are fading out. So let's see what that sounds like. Change the combat parameter to 1. Sounds like a much better transition already. Okay, so far so good. Just going to change combat back to 0. And to close this transition region, just double click on the transition timeline again and it closes it down. Clicking on the left bracket, just zooming back in. So let's just see what that looks like on the timeline. I'm going to press play. I'm going to bring all the tension tracks in, and we're going to jump across to combat. Brilliant. Right, let's just reset those. What we then need to be able to do is jump back from combat into stealth as seamlessly. So again, we're going to create a transition region. So double click on the transition timeline that takes us back to stealth, and you can see it opens up another one of these transition timelines. So we're going to do the same again. We are going to zoom into it because we want to be able to see it, and we know it doesn't need to be 15 or so bars. So I'm just going to reduce that down to maybe slightly longer, 1 or 2 bars this time, because if we listen to the end stingers, we've got 2 to choose from. This is the first one. And this is the second one. So we'll go with the first one. And what we're going to do is drop that stinger again into the combat transition area. Now the stinger is quite long, so let's just make sure the whole thing is fitting in there nicely. Just clicking and dragging, brilliant. And I'll move it across to the left. So what we want to do first is make sure that the combat track plays until the stinger is complete. So I'm just going to extend the combat track over the sort of the loudest point of the stinger and then just fade it out very quickly. So let's put FMOD into combat mode and we'll just hit play. And then we'll change combat to 0. That works really well. I think the loop needs to fade a lot quicker than that. We can play around with that afterwards. And then as the combat stinger fades out, what we also want to do is bring in these stealth loops. So I'm going to click and drag this down just to be able to see everything on the screen. So this stealth mix will start to fade in even as that stinger is building. So again, I'm just going to hold the fade handles. So drag it across, hover over the left hand corner until you see the fade handle, and then click and drag. So what I'm doing here is just making sure that when we go back to the stealth area of the timeline, if there's any tension tracks still playing, they will seamlessly start to play at the same time. Let's see what that sounds like. Perfect, really nice transition. And if you find you want to adjust the volume of some of these assets, you can just click on them. I'm just going to click down here until you see the page divider and drag it up. You can just change the individual volumes of each of the assets as well. Let me just hide these volume automation tracks for a moment. Really cool. So I'm just going to close that transition region down. I'm going to move all the way to the left, and I'm going to zoom in so I can see everything. And let's have a play through. So let's go through the various levels of stealth and tension and combat. Let me reset the game. So we're in stealth mode. There's nothing exciting happening for the player at all. Let's introduce some tension. So that's tension layer 1. And if that, the player's not under threat at the moment, that tension layer can fade out nicely. Bring it back in. Let's increase the tension to 2. And then let's introduce combat. Then I'll change the combat to 0 and we'll go back to stealth mode. And that's it. In about 10 to 15 minutes, we've created a seamless adaptive musical experience for the game player that takes them from stealth into 2 layers of tension, into combat and back again, and it all works seamlessly. There's a lot you can do to finesse this and make it sound really perfect, but as a sort of first quick and dirty tutorial, I think this does exactly what it needs to do. So I hope you've enjoyed it. All of these assets that I've used here are available in my stealth, tension and combat video game music pack that's available on Unity, Unreal, itch.io and Game Dev Marketplace, and some of the individual tracks are available on Pond5 and Audio Jungle, and I'll link to all of those in the description. So I hope you found this useful. There's going to be a load more FMOD tutorials on my YouTube channel, so enjoy and thanks for your time, and I'll see you on the next one.